it's Amanda. It is June and it's Pollinator Week, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about what pollinators are, what they do and why they're important, and how you can help them out. Alright, so what is a pollinator in the first place? There's all sorts of buzz about protecting pollinators and saving pollinators these days, but what is a pollinator? It's really any animal that goes around to different plants, and when they're at those plants, pollen gets on them, and when they go to the next plant, pollen gets on that plant. And so that plant is able to reproduce because those animals help spread that pollen around from plant to plant. So they're kind of like the matchmakers of the plant world. And a pollinator could be an animal from the size of a lemur to a teeny little ant. So think birds, especially hummingbirds, bees, wasps, little reptiles, geckos and little lizards, flies, butterflies, other little insects, and fruit and nectar eating bats. So you might be like, well, I don't like bees and wasps and flies, but they all are really important for pollination. Why are pollinators important? Well, if you like food, pollinators are important to you. The USDA says 80% of crops around the world are reliant on animal pollinators. So that could be either for food that you directly consume or plant-based industrial products too. And not to mention like the biodiversity of life and the general well-being of the ecosystem. So pollinators are important. So here's some quick tips on what you can do to help out pollinators. The first thing is create opportunities for nesting or just leave nests undisturbed. If you have a beehive or a wasp nest on your property and it's not like a big safety issue for you, just let it be, leave it alone, let it go. You can create opportunities for nesting by leaving like piles of wood in like nice sunny well-drained soil places. Those are good spots for nesting for some of those animals. And then I know we talked about earlier in the springtime just leaving your plants alone until it gets a little bit warmer in the late spring for those hibernating animals to like have a chance to come out and emerge out of those stems if they're nesting inside the hollow stems of like flowers, just kind of letting those be. And I know we talked about that before, but just leaving those sites undisturbed until it gets a little bit warmer, that can help out too. A couple years ago, I bought one of those manufactured like little bee hotel nesting site things. I'm gonna be taking that down this year because I learned since then that that can actually do more harm than good if you can't pull those tubes out and clean it off. So they can actually get little mites all over their bodies. So you don't want to make those bees sick that go to your hotel with good intentions that you had, but you could be making those bees more sick. So you want to find a hotel where you can change out the different like tubing and the sizes and clean it out a bit too. The bird is dive bombing me. We've got babies like way over there. You're fine. So just avoid those pre-manufactured bee hotels where you can't chase. So just avoid those pre-manufactured bee hotels where you can't pull the sticks out of it and clean it out. The second big thing you can do for pollinators is to avoid herbicides and pesticides when possible for your garden and your lawn. Now I got some flack on an earlier video because I was using buzzwords like don't use chemicals, and that person didn't like those buzzwords being used. But it is true, like if you're putting chemicals into your yard, you need to know what you're putting in. And when it comes to chemicals and herbicides, we could go way deep and specific into that, and I'd love to do that sometime soon. But let's just talk about, as a general thing first, chemicals. That's my buzzword. Just to cover all those things. So when you're using herbicides and pesticides and when you're putting anything into your lawn, just know what you're putting on there first. And also take a moment to think if you actually need this thing. And if you're just putting it on because, well, maybe something's gonna happen, that might be an overuse of those chemicals. Think about if you're putting it on as a preventative or if you're reacting to something that actually is happening. So unless you actually know that there is a threat of something happening, let's just not use all those chemicals as a preventative, because those can be really harmful to some of our insect pollinators. And Like I said, we can go into the specifics more of that later, like which chemicals are you looking for and exactly what you're looking for on those labels. But for now, just think, do I actually need this chemical on my lawn? If you do choose to use something, maybe you actually do need some of those. Make sure you know exactly what type of pest or issue you're having so you can pick the right product for that specific issue. Follow the directions exactly as on the label and be aware of what you're putting it around. Where are you applying it? Is it around some blooming flowers that have active pollinators on them? Is it a windy day and it's going to spray all over the rest of your garden? So be aware of what's going on and how you're applying that chemical. And when you do find options for those products that you're looking for, choose the one that has the highest LD50 and the lowest residual time. So that's going to have the least effect on our pollinators. And also think about if there's maybe a different solution too. Can you remove those pests by hand? A lot of times you can't, but sometimes you can remove them by hand. Or can you plant other plants that attract that pest's predators? And the third thing you can do to help out our pollinators, and more like uplifting and fun thing that you can do, is plant a pollinator garden. I'm sitting in front of my pollinator garden in my backyard. I can't take all the credit for it because it was already here when we moved in, but I have added a little to it over the years. But also this half of the garden has tended to become just the milkweed section, which is totally fine. So we save this half more for the monarchs, and the rest of the half is more kind of the other flowering flowers that we have. And this is probably not the best time to be showing off my garden because it has been so dry. We finally just got some rain, but it's been so dry and I lost a lot of flowers this spring already. So not the greatest time to show you, but this is what it looks like. Some tips on getting started on planting a pollinator garden. And I want to go more in depth on this too, just to get more specific about the plants and stuff, but we'll probably want to find a master gardener for that because that is definitely not me. But some tips to get you started: look for native plants first because that's really going to cater to your local pollinators in your area. So go to your local small garden center and look for the native section or ask someone. Make a plan of what you're gonna do and kind of have like a little calendar set up so you can write down what plants you're gonna get and when those flowers are gonna bloom, because you wanna have blooms kind of throughout the season. So it's not just like, oh, I planted all these flowers, but they only all bloom for 1 week out of the whole summer. So plan it out so you can see what flowers are going to be blooming when, so that your pollinators will always have a food source. Plant those flowers in clumps, so big groupings of the same flower, and then try and get throughout your garden a variety of shapes, colors, sizes, so that different pollinators can access different parts of them and are attracted to different parts. Learn what pollinators are in your area and what type of plants they're attracted to specifically. And also learn where they lay their eggs and what those caterpillars eat too, because you want to plan for all life stages of those pollinators' lives. You can provide a water source for your pollinators. They have little things called bee baths where it's just like a shallow dish, and then a lot of times they're filled with stones or rocks so that the water doesn't get too deep and they can still have a place to like land on there and take a little drink as they're going about their business in your garden. Otherwise they have to leave and go find a water source, and then they might not come back. They make like specific decorative bee baths or butterfly baths for gardens, but you can also just make your own out of like a shallow dish and some rocks or some like fish tank stones, or like the bottom of the planters. You can use those because those are really shallow dishes too. So it's kind of up to you on what you want to use. And if you're feeding hummingbirds out of a nectar feeder, make sure you're using the right ratios and you're cleaning it out every few days. So make sure you're feeding them properly, and I'll put a link to the Hummingbird Society down below so that you can look up those recipes and make sure you're doing it the right way. Those are my tips on how you can help pollinators for Pollinator Week. And if you are following along for our 52-week challenge on living a more eco-friendly life, welcome back. If you aren't yet, go ahead and click subscribe below and the little bell so you can keep up with our videos on how to live a more sustainable life. We do one thing every week, might be a little bit off, clumped together sometimes, but I try, right? And by the end of the year, there will be 52 weeks of looking at each part of our lives and how we can make it a little bit more eco-friendly. Thanks for watching.